My name is Raymond Bonilla, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. Hi, it's Martine Severin here. The best artists create work that seems simply effortless. And how do they do that? How do they create work that seems really just easy, like they did it in 5 seconds? Well, today we have illustrator and fine artist Raymond Bonilla on the show. Raymond is known for capturing moments that are fleeting but yet are so beautiful. During our time together, he tells us how he came to fall in love with illustration and fine art. We spent some time talking about how you don't have to be born an artist, but that you can acquire the skills and later turn those skills into your own style. We talk about Raymond's process and how his teachers have influenced and guided him along his journey. I loved my talk with Raymond, and I know you'll get lots of really wonderful tips on how to up your game as an artist as well. Enjoy the show. Today in the guest chair, we have Raymond Bonilla. Ray is a celebrated representational painter and illustrator. His work has been exhibited extensively across the U.S. and is represented by both a Ben Gallery in Denver, Colorado, and My Bomb Gallery in East Aurora, New York. His illustrations have won gold medals in competitions at the Society of Illustrators in New York and the Society of Illustrators in Los Angeles. He has won multiple awards of excellence in communication arts annual illustration competitions. His art has been the subject of articles in Communication Arts Magazine and Artists on Art Magazine. He teaches painting at the State of New York at Fredonia. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Thank you so much, Martine. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I stumbled on your work quite recently. By recently, I mean in the last 3 months as I was doing research on the podcast. One of the things that struck me, honestly, by looking at your work was your sense of light and your sense of color. Your work often is bathed in sunshine, but I look at it and I just think warm thoughts in turn. Ray, could you tell us when you first became interested in either art or paintings?
When I actually decided that I wanted to become an artist was probably around the sixth grade when I was in primary school. Geez, I don't even know how old I was then. I remember my father would bring home comic books, after work. And I think it was because he actually had worked next to a comic book store. Always liked reading them. I remember ever so, eventually sort of looking at them, as he was reading them to me, and I had him show me all the ones that he had, and then he would read them before actually going to work, and would then put them on top of the refrigerator. One day, I remember asking my nanny. We had a nanny taking care of my brother, and I have a younger brother. I had told my nanny that those comic books were actually mine, and my parents had left them up there for me. And so I remember her taking the comic book and giving it to me, and me thumbing through it. And I thought of the great idea of cutting out the figures, playing around with them, as like these sort of paper dolls. I just would stare at them for hours and hours and hours. I think from that led directly into animation. My grandparents lived close to my family, from my parents' house, and when we would spend time with them, my grandparents had this collection of old VHS tapes that they would get from like the dollar store. They were just filled with cartoons. They may not have noticed this. I mean, I'm sure they didn't, but they were all the great cartoons of like the 1930s, certain the birth of like one of the booms of animation. Cartoons were just some of the old black and white ones. A lot of the Max Fleischer cartoons, such as like the Max Fleischer Superman cartoon, which was done actually in New York. I just absolutely loved those cartoons. There was just something. There's an artistry behind them that was just completely intoxicating. And I remember thinking, like, I want to create that experience. There's a human behind these things, and it was from there I was said, I want to become an artist. I had initially wanted to become like a comic book artist and animator because I loved the idea of animation, and I found out that there were a bunch of people doing that were behind the creation of these sort of animated films. Forever, I had loved and studied it, just dreamed about actually working on things like that, and I loved science fiction and had loved computers as well. And so when I grew up, I was around like a really kind of a incredible time. There was a lot of birth of a lot of things, especially technology. Around that same time, I saw Toy Story, and that blew everyone's mind because it was the first computer animated feature length film. I remember thinking this is what people probably felt like when they saw, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Just absolutely blown away. I went to, I graduated from undergrad where I did an undergrad degree in basically computer arts, like new media. Went to grad school thinking I wanted to become an animator, and I fell in love with my first semester there. I fell in love with painting and drawing, and then decided I want to become an illustrator and painter. But it all sort of ties back to that sense of just creating artwork that evokes that feeling of excitement that I had when I was a kid.
Well, my question for you is whether or not you had a natural talent for drawing, or was this a skill that you acquired?
Oh, there's nothing natural about my talent. I envy all of my art heroes. A lot of the artists that whose work I really love. They always have you always hear the common story that they were the artists in the class, and they were the ones that always won the art competitions. I was definitely not one of those people. There was always someone better than I was. I never won any art competition. It was just a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication and time, and just I'm a product of really good teaching, to be honest with you. So
I always think that artists are made, but I do think that there are quite a few of us out there who have such an appreciation for the craft, and we end up teaching ourselves or get taught in one way or another to become the artists that we are today. So I'm glad that you shared that with us. Hard
yeah,
work.
it's absolutely just hard work. And one thing I realized that some people have backgrounds where they're predisposed to art and maybe have always kind of done it for a while before actually studying it formally, which kind of gives them a little bit more of an edge because you have a artwork, as it's a visual language, and so you understand, you gain understanding by doing it. I find that like the quote unquote natural talent, I think, comes from just uh, you know kids coming up in school just doing it all the time before they've actually been formally trained. But regardless of whether or not someone has quote unquote talent, you have to be able to mature that talent and develop it. And I think that's where the skill building and learning the craft, I think, is just necessary to becoming an effective and eloquent visual communicator.
And how do you see that translated in the class that you teach? Because I can imagine that there are some students that you're teaching that may have that natural talent, and there are some that may not. How is the way that you're teaching different than how people who seem to have that natural talent teach? Or have you observed such a difference?
I think some of my uh, favorite teachers have been uh, artists who basically approach teaching as a from the sort of the angle of demystifying art. And because I think it was something that I always felt as an artist when I was trying to learn how to become an artist was, oh, it's either, I used to hear people tell me, you either have it or you don't. This thing, this indescribable thing that people have. I was the only artist in my family really that I knew of, and I had some. I found out later, much later on in my adult years, that I was related to artists and other painters, but beyond that, I was really the only artist that I knew, and or someone who wanted to become. So I didn't even have a an example, so like a role model uh, to say like it's to encourage me to do it. And so it wasn't until I had my teachers there that had they basically told me that like you are essentially you're going from consuming artwork and appreciating it because that's what got you here to being able to becoming a producer of artwork. And if you're going to produce artwork, uh, you have to learn, there's sort of guidelines that you have to learn and master physically and mentally in order to be able to uh, evoke that same feeling that you get when you see a really great piece of artwork. So it's a very kind of like workmanship type of approach to it. When you sort of break everything down, you realize like it's just there's certain parts of it, especially the fundamentals of parts, that they're just skills, right? And they're not they're a means to an end. They're not an end in itself, but they're skills, and those skills are learnable. And so when I teach students that have that come from all different sort of levels, I tell them that there's really nothing special about being able to learn how to use value or draw or anatomy. It's basically just a going about understanding and practicing a set of principles that have existed for centuries and were developed by artists who through a lot of trial and error, who were trying to use these skills in order to make a living. And so that's how I approach that. So a lot of times I'll have like a student who has this ability, who comes in with a lot of ability, and a student that really doesn't have as much coming in, but is eager to learn. I've been teaching for around 11 years, since 2009. So it's going to be I guess it's going to be 11 years. Yeah, so it's over 11 years actually. I've seen time and time again the student that's eager to learn and eager to work always improves better, and at the end of the class is always a much more skilled artist than the one that was super skilled coming in but never felt that the need to practice or put themselves in a situation where they didn't know something, or they were out of their comfort zone. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's also, I find it to be really interesting, and I think I see it as well in photography, because there are some people who come in and they might have the skill, but yet they do fall off because in the end, I think drive is always the thing that will push you to where you need to be and push you to helping
Hmm.
you make a living as an artist. I'd love to chat about making the transition from having a skill to developing a style. Can you tell
Hmm.
me a little bit about how you did that with your own work?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I was actually talking about that with a good friend of mine, Tyler Jacobson, who's another incredible artist. When I came to grad school, I had my undergrad was in such it was kind of like a mishmash of classes that I took that happened to be in the context of like a curriculum for a major, but there weren't really a lot of fundamental skill based classes available, just because that's just not what the educational background of the teachers were. So when I went to grad school, I went to a school. It's called the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and I went there because I knew that I was going to learn skills. The idea of like learning the skills was exciting. Every day I felt that I was learning something new that I wasn't able to do the previous day. I always had ideas what I wanted to do as an artist once I had these skills. But what I realized that is as I learned more skills, I started to become a better visual artist in terms of like a better visual thinker. Those ideas kept getting pushed up more and more and more of what was possible because when I became proficient in drawing, I realized like, oh, there's so much more to drawing than I thought, or when I became proficient in painting, I thought there's so much more to painting than I thought, because I literally my eye wasn't developed enough in order to see that stuff. After school is really when I think my inner voice and my style, my approach kind of came about. And because it's so hard, I think for students to develop that in school. And it's something that we stressed about, as my friends and I stressed about all the time, because we were always told that, or pushed to have a quote unquote style, so that you could have a consistent portfolio so that you can get work. You could do that for sure, and you could engineer your portfolio to make it look like that. In the inside, you're developing so much as a student. It took me like a couple of years after school to really understand what I wanted to do. And I always had interest, but it's like you probably, I know you've probably ran into this, as a photographer. You have this idea of what you want people to feel when they see something that of yours, but it's indescribable, right? And you're kind of chasing this feeling that you're going after. And so it took about 4 or 5 years of me experimenting and doing different things, and going down certain career paths, and realized I didn't want to do that. And until I, landed on something that I really felt was my own. And,
Can you tell me about the career paths you went down that didn't quite work out?
when I first came out of school, like anyone, I wanted to make a living. The big thing was at the time, and it still kind of is, was fantasy art, fantasy art and concept art, for movies and video games, because that's where all the money was. I mean, there was some money in editorial and publishing, like book covers and things like that, but they were very much in science fiction and fantasy. I always appreciated that art. I grew up with it, like in comic books and things like that, but I knew deep down inside, it's really not what I would want to do, but I know that I would have a lot of fun doing it, if that makes any sense. And so I actually developed two portfolios. One was just a set of personal work that I had, of paintings that I wanted to just create, and then another one was a portfolio to get work, which was science fiction, fantasy settings and scenes and things like that. And so I just put that out there, thinking that, like, okay, I want to I just need work. And I found that my work best fit into the collectible card games market, or sort of tabletop card games.
There's such a market.
Yeah. So, like, have you ever heard of like Magic the Gathering and
Yes.
Dungeons and Dragons and things
Yes.
like that? So I got a lot of doing work for a company called Fantasy Flight Games, which is still around. They do like the Lord of the Rings card game and Game of Thrones. And so I did a lot of Game of Thrones artwork. And this was before the HBO series, and nobody really knew what it was. And that type of work is not like extremely high paying at all. In fact, it's low paying, and it's low pay and high volume. So I learned quickly that, I have to really be in love with my artwork in order to want to do this, for a long period of time. And I'll never look down on that time of my life, because I learned a ton about working with clients and working fast, learning how to work digitally. I actually never learned how to paint digitally in school, and I realized if I wanted to get more work, I had to teach myself how to paint digitally, which wasn't really hard to do, since I knew Photoshop and I knew how to paint. That stuff, after a couple of years of doing that, and looking at, and in between that, I'm submitting to competitions, getting portfolio reviews from people and from other artists and other art directors, and trying to get as much feedback on my work as possible so I can get further on in my career. I realized that I really needed to love what I was doing. While I was doing all of this stuff, anytime I had a lapse in jobs, I would do a personal piece, and it could be a oil painting, it could be a mixed media drawing, but it would always be something I would want to do, off to the side. Slowly but surely, I started to like paint a little bit more and paint a little bit more, because I would have lapses in work. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do more fantasy artwork because I knew that I really wanted to do this work that was more akin to my personal work. And so luck would have it that at the time, I was still teaching, and I was talking to the head of the theater department at where I teach, and he had asked me, you know, if I knew anyone that did theater posters and or any students because they, needed someone who could draw and paint the figure, and they were looking for an artist, and I said, I would do it, and I remember the head of the theater department. His name is Tom Laughlin. Tom had told me, we can't pay you much. You're going to have to take a pay cut. And I said, well, just throw me a number and, we'll see. And he threw me a number, and it was like three times the amount of money, that I had gotten for card games, and so like I said, yeah, absolutely. Like it was basically like one poster was akin to like three cards, and I would work hours and hours on. And so I started to do theater posters for the school. And my first poster, once I had done it, I realized like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to tell stories of people more like in the real world,
I'm curious, can you describe to us what that first poster was?
It was for a play called High Plains Fandango. Was I think set in the Midwest, around like the aquifers of one of the Midwestern states. I remember thinking about how I could stage a story and stage the feeling of a play in an image. The excitement of doing that, of summing everything up in this one sort of image, was intoxicating. This allowed me to become a little bit more cerebral. Once I did that, I won my first award in a competition, which was like an honorable mention from the Society of Illustrators Los Angeles.
Wow. It's interesting how all of that happens in the routes we end up taking and all of the techniques and the lessons we learned by going down those routes. As you acquired more skills, can you tell us a bit about some of the people who influenced you along that journey?
I had really great teachers along the way, and the first one to really teach me about how to conduct yourself as an artist and how much it was going to take in order for me to quote unquote make it, was an artist by the name of Alberto Ray. And he is a great painter. He had taught at SUNY Fredonia, where I teach. I remember his class very, very vividly because it was the hardest thing I'd ever taken in my entire life. And he really taught me how much time and how much of a commitment that I had to make. The idea also of that art was not a major, it was more of a lifestyle. Another great teacher was a teacher by the name of Tom Bertino, who was an animator. My real first animation teacher. He was incredible. He's a legend. He was behind the animation director behind like Episode One, Star Wars, and Flubber, The Mask. Him and I would talk forever about the art of animation, and also how it related to painting, because his wife was a painter, and so he understood where I was going. If it weren't for Tom, I don't think I would have actually changed my major. I remember when he because he was the head of the animation department, he had told me, I said, I think I want to be going to the illustration and painting program. And I remember him looking up at me and grinning and saying, it was about time. I remember him signing my papers and saying like, good luck. And, I'm going to be here whenever you need me, sort of thing. And I'd worked with them on my thesis because I had actually done a set of paintings and then also an animation. Another teacher, Jeannie Brunick, William Mon, and Craig Nelson, two incredible artists and painters. They taught me just sort of everything I know about like drawing and painting. I mentioned Jeannie Brunick. She was a really instrumental artist, and just having me, focus on to step back and simplify and slow down on my work. I had great teachers such as like Lisa Barrett, another incredible children's book artist, and John Rush, who was the artist behind the Wells Fargo logo, taught me everything about understanding composition and thinking in terms of design and pushing myself as an artist. And an artist by the name of David Grove, who really taught me about appreciating everything. Him and John Rush were very much like having that artist's eye, in the sense that like, how do you make a piece great? Not just good, but how do you make it great?
That is such a good question. How do you make a piece great?
From the piece's inception all the way to the finish, you've got to be pushing the piece as hard as possible and don't skimper on any step. And so the ideation stage, the idea of sketches and putting together ideas, and don't take your first idea or something that you think looks good. Take a bunch of sketches and take the one that you like and then try and blow that one out of the water. How do you push that aspect? Whether it's making little models, whether it's like going to the fabric store and spending money on just different fabrics and lighting rigs and everything like that. And how do you push that, and make that itself like the artwork? And then from there, it's, how do you begin? And, beginning a piece, making sure that by the time you get to the piece, you have a fixed image in your mind of what that is. From there, you want to strive to make the piece feel as fresh as possible, so that it doesn't feel, so people don't see they were big on like people not seeing the labor. Artists that I admire, such as like Harvey Dunn, Dean Cornwell, John Singer Sargent, where their pieces just felt effortless. It was just like they got up one morning, they took a look at the canvas, and they painted something in a handful of strokes, while sipping on their cappuccino, and
It always
that's what I
seems that's
thought.
how it happens, doesn't it? And then you think
Right, right.
about all that it takes to make that one piece and make it feel effortless.
Until I met someone whose work looked effortless, I didn't really fully believe that it took a lot of work. It was like people said, well, no, this person works like this and does all these studies, and they do hours and long, it takes forever, and it's just an illusion. And I'm thinking, sure, yeah, I totally believe that, but it's gotta be effortless for them. And when I met people like, all of the teachers that I talked about, especially, David Grove and John Rush, I remember John telling me, I had asked him, I said, how do you make your pieces look so spontaneous, and just fresh? And I just want to get that spontaneity in my work. And he had, I remember him sitting back and telling me, it's not spontaneity, it's the illusion of spontaneity that you're talking about. And it's like, the reason why this brushstroke looks so fresh is because I already practiced it 10, 20, 30 times before placing it down. And then I remember David Grove was saying the same thing. Like, his work looks like he had done it in, it just sort of magically appeared. He'd have all these washes of gouache and acrylics and just this beautiful bloom of light. For those of you listeners who don't know who David Grove is, he did the movie posters for like Something Wicked This Way Comes and The Outsiders. A lot of movie posters around the 80s and 70s. He had done stuff for like National Geographic. He's like a Hall of Fame illustrator. And I remember thinking, man, that must have taken like a day. What a genius, And I come to find out that it took him weeks to do that. And he said, I could get, when I would put something down, I would get about 70% of my piece in. But then, so I could get that done in 2 days. But then it would take about 2 weeks to get the 30% up to the state of the 70%. And that just blew me away. But again, like, unless you actually see it and do it yourself, I think that's you realize, like, you're the person behind the curtain. I don't know if that makes any sense,
That makes so much sense.
you know.
So let's go to you, though. In some of the works, in your work, particularly your cityscapes or even your lifestyle, it looks so easy. It looks so effortless. And so, based on what you've just said, that's not the case, right?
No, no, no. So I'm always constantly taking photos. I work from photography all the time, and this is something that I really started to become interested in. I always loved that idea that the camera could be a tool to help you create a painting. I use the camera to capture moments that strike me, and I usually all of my paintings are of places and things that have a deep, personal significance to me, or I was, were around the time that I had had a moment where I wanted to kind of cherish. And so they're very much like memory paintings in a sense. I want to, and it's a way of me preserving those memories. I'll take photos of it for weeks sometimes.
So, Ray,
Uh,
can I ask, are all of these photos that you're taking, obviously they're in color, right?
hmm
Are they all in and around Buffalo, where you're based?
some of them are around. A lot of them are around Buffalo, and some of them are around where I grew up in Queens, New York. So,
Because
uh,
when I look through them, I keep thinking, man, this could be Boston. It could be, I grew up in Boston. It could be Boston. It could be um, Chicago.
right.
It could be New York. It could also be, anywhere in the US. So it's quite interesting. They're just magical, especially the ones during the golden hour. And I'm assuming that it's the golden hour and not early morning light, or maybe they are. It's hard to tell, but it really does seem to be just that a moment that you see and you think, wow, that's a beautiful view or that's a beautiful sight, and then you keep going. It's not necessarily always a moment that you hold really dear, but it's just yet it's still super, super special.
Well, I'm glad that's coming through. That's exactly what I I want to evoke out of the work. One of the best compliments I ever had gotten in my studies was from a teacher by the name of Kazuhiko Sano, and he had done the Return of the Jedi poster for Star Wars. And
Wow.
I remember he was on the committee that reviewed my thesis work. At the time, I had done a visual essay essentially of for my thesis of my grandparents and my family in Puerto Rico. And I visited Puerto Rico after the death of my grandfather, and I basically did it about my grandfather after his passing. And so I remember him looking at all these pieces, and he said that your artwork makes me want to tell stories of my own and
Mm.
share them. And I always thought that was such an incredible compliment. I said, no, it was actually done in Buffalo. It goes, oh, it reminds me so much of this, my grandparents' place. And, we used to always get, Sundays across the street, around the corner from that. And so they share this beautiful story, with me. And it's like, wow, that's exactly what I chase,
Yeah, your artwork makes, at least when I look at it, it makes me feel glad that I'm alive, that I live on a beautiful planet, and you make the everyday look so beautiful through your work. How do you know when you're done with a piece?
Boy, it's a great question, and it's one of those things I've tried to, lean on art history to try and help me along to try and figure that out. A piece is done for me when I can't find anything that bothers me. My wife always tells me that like she knows when a piece is about to be finished, when I'm about to finish a piece, because I'm usually very down on it. Like I hate it. Just absolutely, just I'm struggling, and she'll say like, in about a day or so he'll be done.
Well, I mean, that's
So
so funny that you say that because I feel the same way at times. I'll be on a shoot, especially if it's a creative shoot, something I've planned for myself, and I come back and I'm in the deepest funk at the end of a shoot because I always then start thinking about all the things that I could have done that I didn't do. And it's done, you can't go back. As I'm editing, I always think, oh, this is actually really good. And then I start feeling happy, but it never happens right away.
I find myself doing that to my artwork, and I realize like, oh, it's gonna be its own. At the end of the day, it's its own thing, and
For me,
it's
it's
gonna
the
be.
opposite. I don't like starting. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
like,
yeah,
because it's so much work. It's all that prep we were talking about. And
right.
whenever an image, any of the images that are on my site, whatever looks really effortless took so much time to make. It's just, there's so much effort, not just on my part. on everyone's part, particularly since I work with talent, I work with models, and then I work with teams of
Mhm.
hair, makeup stylists, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And so getting all those people together and doing all the prep work, if it's a personal job, it's just, I don't always enjoy it. But when I am on set, I love it. I love it because everything is usually going as it should, and it's basically like a little party. When it's over, that's when I'm
Right.
like,
Right.
I'm really, I don't like it. I just hate it when it's over because I'm like, I could have done this, I could have done that. And to your point,
Right.
in terms
Right.
of preparing for a piece, there's so much that you prepare, and we literally photographers, we have a shoot deck that lists everything from if emergencies happen, this is where the nearest hospital is, to
Oh
this
wow.
is the talent and this is when they're supposed to arrive, this is their shoe size, all of that jazz is in there, including the shot list in terms of you need to take a medium, a close up of this, a wide shot of that, and then in this in landscape and portrait. So all of those things are in. So it's kind of like it's already all set. But the
Mhm.
work to getting it done is usually it's tedious. But bringing people together is what is the fun part.
Right.
Doing the
Right.
post production and calling the work down to the beautiful moments, the spontaneous moments. Those are the ones that's it's a little bit more difficult.
I feel like that all the time with my paintings. I mean, because as many photographs as I take, I might fall on one, but I do a lot of like work in Photoshop to try and bring the, because as you know, like, it doesn't matter how good the camera is. It's like the colors and, the way things are balanced in terms of the levels. It's never perfect. There are ways to get it pretty close, but it's just never, it always needs that extra umph, and with my paintings, especially trying to capture this memory I had of the piece, and a lot of times looking at photo reference for me is like looking at vacation photos.
This brings up an interesting point. So you take the photograph and then you go into
Hmm.
Photoshop. Do you edit it for the colors that you want to appear, that you want to use for the painting, for the final piece? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, so I'll edit everything down to like the size, the appropriate canvas size, how large or how small I want to make it. And then I'll also go into like how light or how dark things are. I balance a lot of the values and then especially the colors, because I don't want to be limited by, the image signal processor on my cameras. I want to be limited by my own like imagination. And so, I introduce tons of stuff. I use a lot of adjustment layers to pull colors in, push other colors, diminish other ones, balance things out, and design, the mood of my entire piece, and where I want the eye to go, and everything down to, yeah, everything down to like where the edges are, like what's on the edge, of a piece. So I design, everything is there because I want it to be there, if that makes sense.
Well, of course. And I also love how on Instagram you take us through your process. Um,
Yeah.
there's one in painting in particular where you just show us exactly from steps from one step to another how you add all the colors and from the sketch to the final product. And I just thought that that was brilliant. Only because I'm really nosy when it comes to someone's process.
I'm such a process. I love just the process of creating an image, and it's something I really fell in love. I've always wanted to know how things were done, just because I did. It just goes back to me not being able to instinctually know how to do something, and or do something well. Learning everything, how someone created an image was super important. And my teacher Bill Mon was instrumental in teaching me how to understand process. The artists take certain steps because they're trying to solve a specific set of problems at a given time. And really, when you're doing something complicated, and a way to do it so that you have consistent results is to break it down into very simplified parts, and like you were saying with your shot list and organizing all of that stuff, like no one sees that, that's never attached to the lifestyle photo that you do, but you have to do that part because you can't just have some people, people show up with whatever and in some random place, right? And hope it works out, because maybe it might work out, but it might not, probably not going to work out most of the time. I think the learning how to do things different ways, and I mean, I've showed a couple of them, and I really want to do more of that in the future for sure. And it's actually why I actually started a live stream show with my friend Tyler Jacobson on Twitch. It's called Live Brush. We started that just so that we can talk about how we do things in different ways, because it just demystifies a bunch of things, things that really shouldn't be mystical in any way. I think that the end product is like your ability as an artist to, the end product shouldn't be something technical. It should be your ability as an artist to evoke the appropriate response you want out of your audience. Like that, I think that's the real skill, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense because at least for me and for lifestyle photography, you're looking for a moment that feels real. And so you create the moment and you're selling a product that will give the fantasy of the life that you will have if you purchase that product. But it can't be fantasy that feels fake, that can't be real.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to feel like the people that you are seeing are having this real moment. And there has to be truth to the work. And I find that when there isn't truth to the work, anyone can see it. It's
Mm-hmm.
really, really clear.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? The audience knows, the viewer knows whether or not you're being, authentic. They could see right through you. The more visually adept you are, the deeper you can see into a piece, even down to like, I remember an art director coming in at the end of like my school year or my studies. We got to have a portfolio review with a bunch of art directors, and I overheard one of the art directors from Dark Horse Comics, is a comic company that's owned by DC. She had said to the student next to me, "Is like, I can tell where you struggled, where you had a good time in your piece, where you really didn't care about it," and it says, I shouldn't be able to tell that. The only thing I should see is you had a wonderful time. And my teacher, Craig Nelson, would say that it's like, you have to paint artwork, make work that feels like it was an absolute joy to make.
Well, Ray, this is a great time for us to wrap up a little bit. I don't want to take more of your time. I've learned so much chatting with you. And I think I can continue talking to you for much longer. But I wanted to ask you a few silly questions and then we'll go
Sure.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So since you loved comic books, which comic book character would you be if you could choose?
I would definitely be, I do have an answer for that, locked and loaded. I would be Iron Man. I just want to point out that I was a fan of Iron Man since the 80s. And when he was like a Z-list character, he wasn't even like a C-list character. So I love the idea of someone being smart enough to hang around with people who were supernatural. His superpower was his genius.
So we talked a lot about movie posters. Is there a movie
Hmm.
poster from the past or a movie that's come out that you'd like to take a crack at?
One of my favorite movies of all time is probably Blade Runner. I love like that those Ridley Scott films where it just goes back to the light, right? I mean that movie is
Oh,
basically just like a story about light. I've always loved the idea of maybe taking a crack at that poster.
I've watched that movie. and I've turned the volume off just so to enjoy the visuals because it's such
Yeah.
a masterpiece. Um,
I thought I was the only one that did that.
oh! There's several movies that I do that with. Well, Ray, how can we keep in touch with you?
You can visit my website, raymondbonilla.com. On Instagram, my account name is Ray Bonilla Painter. I co-host a Twitch live streaming show called Live Brush.
And I'm sure that we'll get the link so we could have it in the show notes for you so that people can just click and save that link so that they can join you and I can join you on Saturdays at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. So, how can we support your work and purchase pieces?
Absolutely. So you can find my work at Ben Gallery, My Bomb Fine Arts, and I actually currently have a show up at Arcadia Gallery in Los Angeles, Arcadia Contemporary. So
Thank you so much, Ray. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
thank you, Martine. It was a real pleasure.